I'm going to do a bit of a review of a home theatre receiver, and the reason is I bought one and I couldn't find anything on the net. So this monster is a Integra DTR-50.3. Now if you haven't heard of Integra, you're not alone. It's the flagship of Onkyo, so it's sort of what Lexus is to Toyota. So this is a DTR-50.3. It was released in 2011. It would have cost you around about $2,100, so not cheap, $1,400 US. It's fully THX certified. Oh, that's a lovely clunk of a switching relay. Curiously, it has a couple of unique features. So it's got two HDMI outputs that I'll show you in a sec, and it also supports phono or record players, which most people wouldn't give two hoots about, but for me that's important. I'll just run through the specs quickly. Also has a very nice remote control that is backlit, so if I press any of the buttons, you probably can't quite see, but it does light up. So there we go, you can see that lit up there. Anytime you press anything, it's a really nice feature. And the remote activates, works really well. In a nutshell, why would you buy this? Well, it upconverts all signals to 4K. It's got a lot of power, 135 watts per channel, with 7 channels continuously driven. I think with 2 channels driven only in pure stereo or direct mode, it's something like 180 or 200 plus watts a channel. It's an absolute monster at 8 ohms. Weighs 17.8 kilos, so it's a heavy bastard. You can see here it's got front HDMI in, it's got a digital optical, an SPDIF, it's got USB. Now, unfortunately, it's sort of designed for the Apple world, but it will accept WMA and MP3s. It also supports digital radio internet. It's got true Dolby HD, it's got DTS, it's got Pro Logic 2, and it's, as I said, fully THX certified. It doesn't have Wi-Fi, it's got auto speaker level setup, it's got 3 components, it's got S-video, it's got composite, it's got 11 speaker terminals. It can also support 2 subwoofers. So if we just come around the back. Alright, have you ever seen such a thing? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 HDMI inputs, and awesomely 2 HDMI outputs. That's important for me because in my main house, this is just sort of a toy room, tiny little 65-inch TV, but I've got a projector. It's only 1080p, but I've also got a 4K TV, so it'll accept a PC input. You've got 11 different speaker terminals here, so you can set up B speakers, you can set up a biamp for a second set of speakers, you can do all sorts of things. You've also got RS-232 inputs for control. Don't know what that universal port does. You've also got triggers out if you want triggers out. Obviously it's got an AM/FM tuner, they all do, so heaps of power and heaps of connectivity. SPDIF optical, coax, and what else have we got? We've got zone 2 out for second amp control, and also not only have you got composite, but there's also S-video and component. So RGB component. I haven't seen that in an amplifier since well before the AC3 days, before HDMI was a thing. Back in the days when Pro Logic was considered pretty funky. So really, that's the kicker: 2 HDMI outs, and the fact that it'll upconvert everything to 4K. Now, just for comparison, I also picked up a Yamaha. This is an HTR-6065. It's also a 7.1 channel home theatre surround receiver. This is only 90 watts a channel compared to the Integra's 135. It's also got internet radio. It doesn't have Wi-Fi, and neither does the Integra, which could be a bit of a problem. It doesn't have phono support. It's got a pretty nice display. I actually think this display is probably a little bit clearer than the Integra, but I'll show them back to back in a second. So it supports 3D DSP. I don't really know if that's of any benefit to anyone. It's got, yeah, internet radio. It's got two coax, 2 optical, 4 composite and 1 component. I'll show you the back in a second. It's got 17 different sound decoding presets, which is a lot more than the Integra. I don't know how many the Integra has, but it's probably less than half of that.
This unit also has full support for 4K and 3D videos.
It weighs 10 kilos, 10.2 kilos, compared to almost 18 kilos for the Integra, so it's a little bit lighter. It does Dolby Digital, DTS, Pro Logic 2 and Digital EX. It's not THX certified. If you do pick one of these up and you don't have a remote, all the controls are accessible on the front. This has a beautiful on-screen display on the telly, and I'll show you that in a sec, and I'll show you the back. Before I show you the back, I'm just going to show you the remote. Basically, you get source and receiver indicators there, volume and program. Basically, the remote's kind of basic. It feels a bit crappy compared to the Integra's remote. I'll just put them side by side. So that's the Integra, that's the Yamaha. But look, it's a remote control. This is the back panel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 HDMI ins. That's probably enough. 1 HDMI out, obviously RJ45 for your radio, internet radio. 2 lots of component video in, a couple of composites. You've got component video out, you've got external remote controls, you've got plenty of so front, center, surround biamping, and another 2 sets of outdoor speakers if you want, or like a B speaker, and 2 subwoofer connections. I don't know if they're independently controllable or if they're just duplicated for RCA connection. But and 2 optical, 2 SPDs there. So I'll put them both together and you can have a bit of a look. So how am I going to test all these? Well, I've got I guess I call it a spare set of Onkyo 5.1 surround speakers. So got an active sub, an SL107, I think that's an 80 watt, 10 inch, no, probably an 8 inch sub. And basically these are, surrounds are SKM 4600 and the mains are SKF 4600. So, and then this is SKC 4600. So this is the 4600 series of home theatre speakers. Alright, so I've got the Integra hooked up. If you press the menu button, you get a basic set of menus. You can go into some basic changes. You can return, go back to some basic changes there. What I want to show you is how you can flip between modes. You've got to press enter each one. So every time you do something, if you change volume, if you change the channel on the tuner, it will come up and basically give you a display. So it's reasonably intuitive. It's pretty ugly. It's not a very nice display compared to the Yamaha, which I'll show you in a second. You can go to some of the deep setup menus like this, change the input-output assignments. You can change the monitors. Now what this does is this changes the output resolution for the 2 HDMI outs, so you can decide which one controls and what the resolution is. So 480p, 720, 1080 and 4K upscaling, or just the same as the source. If we go back to the home menu, setup, go to speaker setup, this is all pretty standard sort of stuff, and it tells you quite intelligently which speakers you want to use. And if you see down the bottom, it tells you which terminals you need to use to affect the kind of change that you want with your speaker connections. So whether you've got all your different speakers, see I don't have front wide. This will do, this is 7.1 amp, but you can actually configure it to do 9.1. So all I've got is, oh, here you go, you can change the low pass frequency, you can change the subwoofer phase, pretty standard stuff. You can also change speaker distances. Again, a pretty primitive display. You can do level calibration. Press return to get out of that. You can change equalizer settings. So you've got very, very fine calibration. So it looks like it's 16 band. I can't hear anything near 16 kilohertz, so let's go away from that. And you can also set up the THX audio. So whether you've got secondary subwoofers, loudness plus, a few other settings here. So if you're playing a Blu-ray, and in this case I've just cranked something up through the PS4, what you do is you just press the corresponding mode button, and you can switch between modes. So you can see the bottom right hand corner, multi-channel THX, THX music and THX games. So it's smart enough to know that if I'm connected to a Blu-ray DVD, it won't let me change to an irrelevant mode like a cathedral or something like that. I'm sure you can, but I haven't quite worked out how to do that. So one thing I do like is if I go to the setup menu, go down to miscellaneous, go to volume, I can change the display to absolute, which is a percentage, or I can change it to relative, and I can also adjust the muting level. So probably minus 20 dB is pretty good. Can limit the volume, power on volume to be last, or make it 0 or minus 80, so it's really quite configurable. You can also adjust headphones, so really quite powerful, even if the on-screen display is a little bit outdated and a little bit ugly. Righto, so if you plug a USB in, okay, basically nothing comes up, so what you've got to do is you've got to press USB on the remote, USB storage, select it, go down, you've got individual song selection, and then you can use these controls here to stop, pause, etc. Just a pink noise test. Anyway, so USB works fine. And like all these systems, there's no real eject. So it does actually come up with a display, you can see. Just basically is reading the EXIF data from the MP3 file. Okay, so you can see that the maximum possible volume is plus 18 dB, and it's dead silent, which is really nice. So the next test is trying to be a little bit scientific. I've got a El Cheapo A-weighted sound pressure level meter, and I'm going to set this up for some sound pressure level tests with some pink noise. I'm going to do it at minus 40, minus 20, and if I can at 0 dB. Got a set of earmuffs here, and I'm going to record the relative sound pressure levels, so that means I can benchmark it against the Yamaha, which basically means I'm comparing a $2,100 amplifier against, I think it was a $460 amplifier. Pop the top off the Integra just so that you can sort of see the monstrous heatsink that's in there, and the very large transformer. But awesomely, it's also got two cooling fans, little 4-inch fan there and another one there, so designed clearly to be able to extract that heat. I mean, this thing does weigh 20 kilos, so that's where the bulk of the weight is. And two very big filter caps down there. Just noticing that the amplifier's been off for a couple of days, and this transformer is actually warm. Okay, so the amp is in standby and it's drawing 40 watts doing nothing. That is just appalling. Now if I turn that on, 56 watts, which I'd kind of expect, because really what's it running? It's running the display. But basically, to draw 40 watts on standby the whole time is just appalling in 2022. That's terrible. You'd have to basically have this thing on some sort of timer circuit. For comparison, in standby mode, the Yamaha uses 0 watts, and if I turn the power on, jumps up to 39. Oh, there we go, little spike. So 32 watts and 0 watts in standby. Alright, to be fair, this is the standby power demand of the Integra. It's been off for quite some time, so if I turn that on with the remote, you'll see that the standby power jumps up. Okay, the on-demand power is about 50 watts. Now if I turn that off, it goes to 0. So I don't know what it was doing before, but that was unfair of me to say that it had a high standby power demand, because it's gone straight back to 0 watts. Alright, so if I go to net, okay, now Napster, dead. Opio, I don't have an account. DLNA works, it picks up your network, anything that's shared, it'll pick that up. I've tried that. Spotify, I've tried to log in, can't log in. Last FM, haven't tried that. And you got to remember, oh yeah, it wants me to sign into an account, so maybe that does work. But VTuner does work. So local Australia, there you go. So that works fine. And if I go back to the home menu, this will keep playing in the background until I select another source. One last final point on the Integra is, I was lucky enough when I bought this one, it actually came with the Odyssey Setup Mic, which basically plugs in. It looks like a pretty bog standard, there you go. So it actually asks, it's basically starting to go through the setup process there. This is the setup mic for The Yamaha, same sort of thing, 3.5mm plug. So this is the manual, 99 pages in English. You can set up macros, you can do whatever you like. Very, very comprehensive. As I said, a complicated model to use, but I think they pretty much all are. So now on to the Yamaha. Now I may not have mentioned this before, but we've got basically $2,100 for the Integra versus what I believe was $1,100 initially recommended retail on the Yamaha, and I believe it ended up in 2012 selling for as little as $498 at JB Hi-Fi, between 25% and 50% of this big monster here. So the wiring hookup is done for the Yamaha, and I've got to say it's a lot simpler than for the Integra. So the nomenclature, or I guess the labeling, is a bit clearer. Zone 2 speakers. You can do Zone 2 speakers on the Integra, but it's got to be via an amplified circuit. So, and I believe it's the same with the Yamaha. But everything is pretty clearly labelled, no complaints from the wire up. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on the remote. Now just be aware, you are viewing this on a 65-inch Kogan TV, which was a freebie, by the way. Basically it was a council street bounty. So as soon as you press a mode button on the remote, you get you use the up buttons to flick between all of these different modes. There are a plethora. There are so many that you wouldn't use, basically you wouldn't use 10% of them. And that's what you find. You have all these modes, and stereo, you listen to basically 7-channel or 5-channel stereo if you've got 5 speakers, and surround, you listen to THX, or you listen to DSP decoding, Dolby 2, Dolby Digital, DBS. You don't listen to live club, you don't listen to mono, you don't listen to action game, all that kind of crap. So, but if I flick over to radio, it comes up with a very, very nice display. It's actually quite a good little setup. I think the UA is much, here we go. Going to browse, here we go, going to my presets. It'll tell you what it can do, what it can't do. So you can use the mode buttons to flick between sound effects. Yes, they all work. And it's quite a snappy processor in that it swaps between modes. Sometimes older Sonys, for example, would take a couple of seconds to actually work out how to change the program. There's not a lot of difference between all these, by the way. I'm going to do auto setup on this bad boy, on the Yamaha. This is your mic plug-in point. So I don't have a dedicated mic, as I said before. I've just got this standard mic. It actually tells me on the screen, as well as on the TV, that we're about to change a setting. We can go into measure, we can basically go into the auto setup mode. So up there it's trying to start me in the auto setup mode, so pretty clever that it selected that or detected that, and it wants to go into a setup. I'm going to try a little experiment here. This is the Odyssey mic dedicated to the Integra. So if I plug this in to the YPAO mic input, it goes to the same basically startup screen for automatic speaker assignment and checks. So what this proves is that you can use any 3.5mm mono microphone jack system. You don't need a dedicated one specifically for this Yamaha amplifier. So again, big difference, 5 HDMI inputs versus 7, but the real killer is that this one, the Integra, has 2 HDMI outputs. The Yamaha only has a single HDMI output, so that could be a bit of a deal breaker for me. If I go to on-screen menu, you get all these pop-ups on the side, so you can change your input, you can change your scene. So let's go to scene. You can change your listening environments for each individual selection, so that what that means is that when you select something on the remote control, it automatically pre-allocates a mode to it. So it might be DVDs, you might want Dolby DBX, and for listening to the radio you might only want 2-channel stereo. Okay, inputs, pretty straightforward stuff. So these are all of the assignable inputs. So sound program, that's all pretty straightforward. There are just so many of them. You've got to actually press enter for it to switch between them. Right, information, so it tells me that what my input is, and it tells me what my audio signal is, if there's a sampling bitrate, all that sort of thing. So it's pretty clever. It does actually support 4K. Okay, go to setup, go to manual setup, okay, go to configuration. You can say whether or not you've got surrounds, yes, large, small, none, all that sort of thing. You can do this in the, now, subwoofer, extra bass. I don't have an extra bass, I've only got a normal subwoofer. You can select your crossover frequency, 80 Hertz. It's probably pretty good. So my front speakers are large, my center is small, and my surrounds are there. Now I don't have surround backs, so because it detects that they're not plugged in. So quite an intelligent setup system, and really quite pretty to look at. Whereas the Integra, yeah, just a little bit naff, given the cost of it, and given the fact that they're both the same age, around about 2012. Now you can change digital delay on all of these. They're all totally configurable, and that's if there's a syncing problem between video and audio. You will never hear it on a source like a CD or a tuner, but you will see it if you're watching a movie or, say, particularly watching news broadcasts. If I just plug a USB into the front, let's see what happens. It tells me that USB is connected. I press USB, and it tells me what the folders are. Alright, easy, nice. MP3 files, yes it does, which we knew. And let's see if it plays WAV files. Yes it does. It gets easily over 105 dB, which is just bonkers, way too loud, but I had hearing protection on. So if I go to net, what I want to do is see if I can find any basically FM radio stations and see how this works for a web radio. So if I press on net, I guess I'm in Asia, but let's see. Oceania, that's where I am. Australia. All stations, go by genre. Genre, a great English word. Okay, go back to ambient, which is where we were before. Okay, easy listening classical. Serene digital radio. Nice. So that was pretty straightforward. Seemed to be a few less choices, but again, that on-screen display really is much easier to use and much nicer to view. There's not a lot of FM stations here. Buffering is certainly pretty quick. Got about 35 megabits a second here. So what I want to see is if there's any other opportunity or anything else, and it looks like there's not. So net radio, you don't have built-in apps. For example, Webster, which is dead, but Spotify or things like that, you've only got FM radio, digital radio. So here we go. I played with this for quite a while, and what I found was that you could load up these pages and they tried to buffer, but basically you didn't get any result out of any of them. So some of the radio stations work, some of them don't, and this is after an update. I'm just going to show you how to update the firmware. You press the straight button, press the power button, it goes into advanced setup mode. You can use left and right arrow keys. We don't want to mess with speaker impedance, leave that at 8 ohms for example. You don't want to mess with your remote ID. PAL, because we're in Australia. Monitor check, yeah, we want to leave that on. Initialize, we don't want to reinitialize it, which is rebooting it. We want to press, we want to go to update. I don't have a USB with the 17.9 meg update on it, so I'll press straight again to get to network. Then you press the info button here, and it goes to a network update. So it's just checking, and we'll see how it goes. Verifying, so there we go. So that is how you update the firmware. Now, if you need to find where to get this, if you want to do it via USB, you need to go to the Yamaha website or just Google HTR-6065 firmware update, and you'll find a link to Yamaha, and you'll find the 17.9 meg download. And you can unzip it, and that took a very long time, but it's updated. It tells me to power off, you power it back on, it comes back to where it was. Right in time for the news. Very nice. So a final comparison. Well, I've included the Sony there just because I've got it and it looks pretty. It is a full HDMI 7.1 channel discrete amplifier, but I'm not going to compare it because it's a bit old and it doesn't do 4K upscaling. So really, what's the difference? The Integra, it's a lot more expensive. It has a lot more power. It's got 135 watts compared to 90 watts. Does that make a difference? Yeah, it does. It's a lot louder, but the Yamaha is easily loud enough. It'll push well over 100 decibels in your living room, and if that's not enough for you, then man, you are deaf. The Yamaha has basically too many sound modes and you can't hear the differences between them, whereas the Integra has probably the right amount. They both do 4K. The big pro of the Integra is that it's got a second HDMI out. If that's important to you, if you need to run a projector or another television or a monitor at the same time, then that is going to be the one for you. The Integra also has a much better remote. It also has a phono out. The Yamaha does not have turntable capability, but you can buy a preamp for about 40 bucks. So if you really need a preamp, then you can buy one from eBay. They both do automatic speaker setup really nicely. They both do automatic phase detection of speakers. They both have remotes that support macros. The big difference is that the remote of the Integra is much better. It's backlit and it's just a bit more logical, and it's clearly had a bit more money spent on configuring it. The bad things for the Integra: the on-screen display is pretty crap. It's a bit outdated. It's a bit less intuitive to set up the speakers, although once you get the hang of the terminals as shown on the screen, it actually works pretty well. There are also too many redundant music apps on the Integra. It tried to probably be a little bit too clever with Opio and Napster and things like that. Half of those don't even exist anymore. And it's only got iPod control, same as the Yamaha, so none of them support the Android family, probably because Android wasn't around or very strong in 2012 when these were released. So if I was going to keep one, and I am, which one would I keep? I'd say I'd have to go with the Integra. It just has more of everything, and even though the liquid crystal backlit display is not quite as pretty, and the screen display on the TV is not quite as pretty, it's still by far the bigger and better amplifier. Thanks for watching.